Hey everyone, and welcome. We're about to jump into a really big topic in biology, something called life processes. And we're going to start with the one that's at the heart of it all, nutrition. I mean, think about it. It's what fuels literally everything that's alive. So yeah, let's get right into it. All right, so let's just start with a super simple question, right? What does it even mean to be alive? Like, is it just about moving or growing, breathing? Well, it turns out all those things, they're just little pieces of a much, much bigger picture. And yeah, that bigger picture, that's what we call life processes. It might sound like a fancy term, but it's actually pretty simple. Think of them as all the essential jobs, the maintenance work that any living thing has to do just to stay alive. Seriously, without these processes, life just wouldn't happen. Okay, so when we talk about these processes, we usually boil it down to four main ones. You've got nutrition, that's getting and using food, then respiration, which is how we get the energy out of that food, transportation, that's like the body's internal courier service, and finally, excretion, which is, taking out the trash. So for today, we're going to zoom in on that very first one, which is arguably the most important, nutrition. Honestly, you can just think of it as the ultimate energy game, because every single thing you do, even just lying there sleeping, takes energy. And where does that energy come from? Yep, the food we eat. Now, when it comes to how living things get their food, they basically fall into two big groups. On one side, you've got the autotrophs. These are the ultimate do-it-yourselfers, like plants. They make their own food. And then there's everyone else, the heterotrophs. That's us. We're the ones who have to go out and find our food by eating other things. So let's talk about those autotrophs first. I like to think of them as nature's master chefs. They don't need a grocery store. They just take really simple stuff from the environment and poof, they whip up their own food. And what's their secret ingredient? It's sunlight. And this whole amazing process is, of course, photosynthesis. It basically happens in three main stages. First, that green stuff in leaves, chlorophyll, grabs a bunch of energy from the sun. Then, that light energy gets turned into chemical energy, and it's used to literally split water molecules apart. And finally, the plant uses parts of that water to turn carbon dioxide into carbohydrates. And that, right there, is the plant's food. So the first thing a plant makes is a simple sugar called glucose. That's like its immediate fuel. But, what if it wants to save some energy for later? Well, that's when it converts that glucose into something more stable. Starch. And that's a really important point. Starch is basically how plants put energy into storage. Okay, so enough about the self-sufficient plants for a minute. Let's switch gears and talk about us, the heterotrophs. Since we can't do that whole photosynthesis magic, we're left with one option. We have to eat other things, whether it's plants or other animals. We're definitely in the depends on others club. But here's the thing. Just saying we get food from others is a bit too simple. It's not a one-size-fits-all deal. There are actually three totally different ways that heterotrophs get their nutrition. Okay, so what are these three types? Well, you've got holozoic nutrition. That's what we do. Then there's saprotrophic nutrition, which is what things like fungi use. And finally, parasitic nutrition, the strategy of critters like tapeworms. Let's take a closer look at each one. First up, holozoic. This is probably the one you're most familiar with. An animal takes in a chunk of complex food, like a whole sandwich, and then all the work of breaking it down happens inside the body. That's the key thing to remember. Digestion is an inside job. And yeah, the examples are everywhere. Us, our dogs, even tiny single-celled things like an amoeba. We all do it the same way. Eat first, and then let our internal systems handle the rest. All right, now let's talk about saprotrophic nutrition, because it's pretty much the total opposite. Think about mushrooms growing on a dead log. They don't eat the log. Instead, they release their digestive juices onto the log, breaking it down outside their bodies. Then they just absorb all the good stuff. So here, digestion is an outside job. This group is full of things like fungi, mushrooms, and yeast. You can really think of them as nature's ultimate recycling team. They're the ones responsible for breaking down all the dead stuff and returning those nutrients to the ecosystem. Super important. And that brings us to our third and final type, parasitic nutrition. This one's all about a tricky relationship. You have one organism, the parasite, that lives either on or inside another living thing, the host. It gets all its food from the host, but here's the catch.
it usually tries not to kill it. I mean, it makes sense, right? If your lunch dies, you've got no more lunch.
And you see examples of this everywhere. There are plant parasites like Cuscuta or a marbell. There are the lice that can live in our hair. And then you've got the internal ones, like tapeworms. All of them use the same strategy. But here's what's so cool. The big takeaway from all of this. It doesn't matter what kind of heterotroph you are always, always dependent on autotrophs, either directly or indirectly. Think about it. A lion might eat a gazelle, but what did the gazelle eat? Grass, a plant, an autotroph. It all comes back to them. It's a fundamental rule of life on Earth. Every single food chain starts with an autotroph.
Okay, so we figured out how we get our food, right? That's nutrition. But that's really only step one. The food is in our system. Now what? How do we actually get the energy out of it? Well, that's the perfect setup for our next life process, respiration. But hey, we'll get to that in our next explainer. For now, just think about that.